Story 1. When I was 3, my parents told me not to jump on the couch. Then they left for the evening, and now I have a scar on my forehead. The 80s were a wild time. Story 2. When I was a child, I tried to microwave my finger. Luckily, I did not realize the door had to be closed for the microwave to work. Unfortunately, I thought I could fool it by slamming the door shut with my finger still inside. Story 3. The doctor messed up my circumcision. It looks like a microwaved hot dog. Story 4. I had open heart surgery when I was born. I have a scar from my chest to my belly button and additional scars across my stomach and rib cage from chest tubes, staples, and stitches. I love my scar. I have had 3 open heart surgeries. Each time the scar becomes thicker, it makes me smile. Story 5. I am too young to remember, but I allegedly taunted a Doberman until it attacked me. Story 6. I was born with one. When my mother had a cesarean section to deliver me, the surgeons accidentally cut the back of my head. It is actually pretty common, and sometimes they cut much worse places like the face. Story 7. I was hit by a car when I was 5. I had emergency surgery for internal bleeding and a collapsed lung. They opened me down the middle, and I now have a large scar that runs from just below my breasts to the bottom of my stomach, just above my pelvic bone. I also have many scars from the accident, but this one is my favorite. It reminds me that I am a survivor. Story 8. A doctor poked me in the head with a needle when I was born, and now there is a dot in the middle of my head. Story 9. When I was 5 years old, while opening a can of dog food, I nearly cut my thumb off. Story 10. My childhood dog jumped on me while we both had the zoom eyes, and her claw left a scar just above my heart. I love it, we were having so much fun. Story 11. I fell off the coffee table and landed on a pair of scissors. Story 12. I got a little too sad one day and did something stupid. Story 13. I was bitten in the face by a dog. Don't worry, I bit the dog back. Story 14. Remember the old glass Coca-Cola bottles? They would sometimes explode if jostled too much during shipping. In 1983, when I was 3 or 4 years old, one exploded on a grocery shelf, and I now have a scar around my mouth that required 24 stitches. If I lived in the United States, I could have sued for a huge amount of money. Story 15. I fell asleep on the toilet, struck my head on the bathtub, and received a few stitches. Story 16. A bully repeatedly smashed my face into a brick wall. Thanks, Mom. Story 17. The skin on my finger got caught in the bathroom stall lock after I locked it. I do not know how it happened, and I had no choice but to rip my finger free. It bled a lot, and now I have a faint white scar. Story 18. I have a bad injury in my knee. I slipped on a rock covered in algae and landed on my hands and knees. One knee hit a very sharp rock that was standing vertically. Story 19. A friend with special needs threw a swing at me on the playground in 4th grade, splitting my forehead open. Story 20. I shot my grandfather's .30-06 rifle with the scope too close to my face. Story 21. I don't know. I woke up one day with a deep split lip and wondered why I could taste blood. I was very small and had woken up in my mother's bed. I remember asking her what had happened, and she screamed that nothing had happened and told me to shut. I suspect she hurt me badly enough that I don't remember. I wonder whether I was knocked out or simply blocked the event from my memory. Still bothers me. I'll never get answers. My mother denied it ever happened, but the scar on my lip says otherwise. Story 22. A tree branch became stuck in my foot when I was 5. Fun times. Story 23. A new kid at school was at my bus stop. He was in the same grade. We talked all morning, then went to different classrooms. After school, he sat with me on the bus and talked the whole ride home. After we got off the bus, he shoved me to the ground, grabbed a chunk of ice from the ground, and tried to stab me in the eye. I have a small scar next to my eye now, 30 years later. For a long time, I also had an emotional scar that prevented me from letting anyone get physically close because I could not trust them not to attack me. Story 24. One of the first scars I remember was from playing Red Rover on the street with neighborhood kids. I was one of the younger ones. My name was called I ran into the arms of the older boys, and I was slammed to the ground. I suffered road rash on my knees and received a few scars from the incident. We were not allowed to play the game on the street after that. Story 25. I met a man recently with a fresh wound that extended from the middle of his cheek across his eye to just above his eyebrow. He had a close encounter with a circular saw while working as a carpenter. Fortunately, it did not reach his eye. It will likely become a distinctive scar over time. Story 26. I was 2 and crawling around when I fell face first against a plastic box. I got stitches, which were far more traumatizing than the initial incident. Now it is just a small scar on my eyebrow that is really only noticeable if I glare or wrinkle my forehead. Story 27. I scratched the area around my right eye when I had chickenpox as a child. I have a crater there now, but it looks cool. Story 28. I dropped a piece of candy next to my dog and tried to pick it up. My dog bit me. Story 29. Soup, quaint, dazzling, decide, dear, cobweb, merciful, merry, cable, outgoing. Story 30. It was self-harm. I kept the flame on a Zippo lighter until it was red hot. Then I pressed it into my arm. Story 31. My first was my mother. She was playing with me when I was a baby, and her nail accidentally grazed my lower lip, leaving a small scar. I like the scar and hope it never disappears. Although it hurt, it remains a valuable memory. Every now and then she remembers and tells me the story, and we smile together. Story 32. I do not know about the first scar, but I have a huge gash on my leg that looks like something tried to bite me. I was riding my bike home after a water fight at a friend's house, and my feet were still wet. My foot slipped off the pedal and my leg went right into the gears. I should have gotten stitches, but I was too afraid to show anyone. So it granulated and healed up on its own. Story 33. Almost lost my finger to an infection my parents did not take seriously. I still have the scar from the lancing procedure I received in the hospital. Take infections seriously, everyone. Story 34. I was running in gym class wearing socks when I slipped and hit a bench just below the knee. The thin skin and tissue split open down to the bone, but it did not bleed at all. As I recall, my bones looked kind of yellow rather than white. Story 35. I got chickenpox when I was about 5. One on the top of my foot was particularly itchy. I scratched it until it scarred, and I still have a small round scar on the top of my foot 25 years later. My father put socks on my hands and feet and secured them with duct tape so I could not scratch myself. Story 36. A dry blade of grass about the thickness of hay pierced my ankle and broke off inside. I left it alone after an unsuccessful attempt to dig it out. My ankle swelled and did not look good. One day I pushed gently on it and it released a large amount of pus. The blade came out and left a tiny scar. Story 37. I was a kid, too young to know that playing with a knife was not safe. Story 38. I was breaking boards at a martial arts seminar when one of the boards broke in a way that left a deep cut on my foot. I did not notice I was bleeding until about 15 minutes later. The scar faded over time, but it remained for years. Story 39. I got punched in the eye by a man wearing a ring. I used to have a cool scar on my eyebrow, but it has been so long that the hair has grown over it. The eyebrow needs to be trimmed and parted to see the scar. It sucks. Story 40. I fell off a picnic table when I was 2 years old and hit my head on the patio. The ironic part was that my parents were visiting my grandmother at the hospital where the ambulance took me. Story 41. My friend and I were walking to school when we started play fighting. I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. He swung his book bag at me, forgetting that he had a brand new lunchbox inside, and knocked me out. I was unconscious and bleeding from my temple for a while before another child's mother came out and took me inside. Story 42. I rode a bicycle downhill while wearing cowboy boots that were too big for me. You can guess how it went. Story 43. I fell onto a rock and cut my knee. It bled profusely, but strangely I felt no pain. Story 44. In short, a wooden ladder has a rusty nail sticking out. Story 45. It was Easter Sunday. My mother said, Stop jumping on the couch or you're going to fall and crack your head open. I, knowing a lot more than my mother, decided to follow my heart. So that year we spent Easter in the hospital. Story 46. I smashed into a glass door on my 11th birthday. Now I have 3 knee scars to show for it. Story 47. I broke my left arm when I fell off a scooter while riding downhill without a helmet. Story 48. I was 7 years old, running down a hill while holding an electric drill with poor trigger discipline. I tripped and fell, and the drill pierced my hip, luckily missing the bone. Story 49. Always cut away from yourself. I laughed out loud and stabbed myself in the eye socket, about 1 inch from my eye, a small 10mm slit. Story 50. I was born. Everyone has the same scar, a belly button. Story 51. This is a scar from when they removed a tumor from my spine. I was 2.5 when it happened. It used to run from my left shoulder across my back to my right hip. As I grew older, it shifted and is now on my right shoulder blade and swings under the armpit near the ribcage. In high school, I joked to girls that I had been bitten by a shark, and later I got a large shark tattoo on my back to remember it. Story 52. Plucky, squealing, gaze, knee, insurance, tap, handle, ring, nose, political. Story 53. When I was about 3, someone scared me. I panicked, tripped while running, and cracked my chin on the corner of the coffee table. There was blood everywhere, I needed stitches, and I was left with a decent-sized scar. 30 years later, it is hardly visible. I agree, scars are very cool. I have always wanted one of those over-the-eye scars that goes through the eyebrow. Story 54. While collecting the trash, broken glass in the bag sliced my skin and scratched another area. Interestingly, the cut hurt much less than the scratch. Story 55. The first one I remember is when my horse pushed me into a barbed wire fence. I received 5 stitches in my thigh. Story 56. I had open heart surgery. I do not show the scar because it is long and ugly, but it serves as a reminder that I am still alive. Story 57. A lot of people I know have their first scar under their chin, including me. I wonder how common this is. Story 58. I was born with hypospadias. As a baby and again as a toddler, I had surgery on my penis to reposition the urethral opening. I later had 2 additional surgeries. Story 59. I ran face first into a wall at age 5. I had 7 stitches on my forehead and was convinced I was Harry Potter. I am still just as clumsy today. Story 60. As a kid, I tripped, fell face first, and bit my tongue deeply. Story 61. The oldest scar I have is from my childhood cat. He swiped my foot one day when I was running around the house while laughing out loud. It is barely noticeable now. Story 62. We were on the green next to the driving range at the golf course. A man hooked his drive and the ball struck my eyebrow. There was a lot of blood, and I needed many stitches. Story 63. I was about 4 years old when I ran down the hallway and banged my forehead on a corner of the house my parents hadn't baby-proofed. I still have a small white line there 15 years later. Story 64. I have a scar on my upper forearm from baking. I had oven mitts on, but I was too excited to take the cookies out of the oven and burn my arm. Story 65. I was playing cricket at school, fielding right in front of the bike shelter. When I went to appeal for a wicket, I threw my hands enthusiastically above my head into the bare metal of the corrugated iron roof and split the webbing between my thumb and fingers. I could squeeze it and show everyone the inside of my hand. Eventually, someone suggested I should see the school nurse. I went to emergency for stitches. All I remember is the doctor pulling out a giant syringe and telling me it was anesthetic. I thought he was going to jab it into my wound, so I said no. I'd prefer him to stitch it up without pain relief. My mum convinced me otherwise, so he gently squeezed the liquid from the syringe onto the wound. That made much more sense. More than 30 years later, I still have the scar, but it's down to about 5 millimeters in length. Story 66. I put my hand on the flat iron when I was about 5, because even though my dad told me it was very hot, I needed to test it. It was definitely hot. Story 67. When I was a kid, I walked my dog when it bolted and dragged me down the street. Story 68. I attached a metal can to a rope and used it to play tetherball. My cousin hit it too hard, and the sharp lid sliced my right eyebrow. Good times. Story 69. I crashed my bike doing a daring wheelie. I got a noticeable scar on my knee. The scar has faded over time but is still visible. Story 70. I tripped at a mini golf course when I was 4 years old and had stitches on my forehead. Story 71. It must have been surgery on my neck or upper spine. I would have been about 4 at the time. Story 72. I was a toddler playing outside. I remember something that looked like a house-sized pig trotting toward me, which horrified me. I ran to the house and up the stairs, where a case of empty deposit bottles was waiting to be collected. While scrambling up the stairs, I fell with one knee into the case. Some bottles broke, lacerating it and leaving a 5-inch vertical scar that remained for the rest of my life. Story 73. I stuck my hand into an electric heater while trying to retrieve a toy car when I was very young. I have 2 white lines and a circle on my knuckle. Story 74. When I was a kid, I tried to take a 90-degree turn on a bike hands-free. Fortunately, the bike chain slipped off at that exact moment. Story 75. I was 4 years old. I slipped on a Hot Wheels car while my older sister was chasing me and hit my head on a bed frame. I needed 5 stitches on my forehead. Mom was at work and Dad was watching us. Mom was less than thrilled. Story 76. I pulled a frozen pizza out of the oven using the flimsy cardboard packaging as a tray and burned the back of my hand on the oven door. Story 77. I was about 4 years old and hungry at night. I had not eaten that day. I snuck into the pantry, grabbed a can of green beans and a butter knife, and tried to stab the can open. I stabbed myself between my index and middle fingers. Story 78. Not counting events from my infancy, my first scar was on my eyebrow where I headbutt the corner of a table while roughhousing with a sibling, laughing. It was not my last, but it remains my most obvious scar to this day. Story 79. My older brother was dancing with me and spinning me around. He got too close to a brick wall, and I smashed my head into it. I was under 5 years old, but I have no memory of it. It is not very noticeable, but there is a lump and a line on my forehead near my hairline. Story 80. When I was 2, I tried to eat the gerbil's cage and now have a scar on my upper lip. That is not a cool way to get it. Story 81. I was going through a gate at my elementary school when a broken chain link sliced the top of my hand. Story 82. I snagged my ear on a chain link fence while riding a sled with steel runners. I bled, but I was moving very fast. Story 83. A hula hooping session gone wrong landed me in the emergency room for 10 stitches on my chin when I was 11. I loved hula hooping and could do all sorts of tricks with it. One afternoon, when my mom was with my brothers at soccer practice and my dad was still at work, I was twirling the hoop around my ankle. For some reason, I challenged myself to do this while standing on the deck railing. I slipped and landed chin first on the edge of a piece of wood lining the flower bed. At first, I did not really feel anything, but I knew I had been hurt. I ran over to my neighbor's house and she practically screamed when she saw me standing there calmly with blood splattered all over my white shirt. Probably the dumbest reason to get stitches. Story 84. I was 5 years old in the mid-1970s. My older brother and I were playing outside the apartment complex where we lived. He was supposed to be watching me, but he got distracted. I was playing with my toy car and discovered it rolled much better on the asphalt parking lot. I was lying on my belly behind a parked car, so engrossed that I did not hear the couple get into the car and start it. Suddenly, the car began backing up. The rear passenger wheel rolled over my right leg and stopped short of my pelvis. Instinctively, I assumed a push-up position. As best I can remember, that kept the car from rolling over the rest of my body. My brother realized what was happening and started screaming at the people in the car. "You are on my brother!" The person in the passenger seat opened the door, saw me, and had the driver pull the car forward off me. The fibula, tibia, and femur in my right leg were all cleanly broken. I received a scar on my knee from scraping on the asphalt and another scar where they put a pin through my tibia. That is about it. Story 85. I hit myself in the eye with a sledgehammer that weighed 16 pounds when I was 7 years old. Story 86. I was about 6. I was playing King of the Hill on an industrial spool with a goat named Rambo. I had to climb over a barbed wire fence to play with the goat. When I was done, I climbed back over the fence and the goat hit me. I fell, and one of the barbs ripped my stomach from my nipple to my groin. It was deep enough to leave me with a lifelong scar, but not deep enough to spill my guts. Story 87. I tripped while running after a bowling ball and split my chin open on the ball. Story 88. A pot of boiling water was pulled down on me when I was a baby, causing third-degree burns on one arm and one shoulder. Public service announcement. If you have small children in the house, always turn pot handles toward the wall so they do not hang over the edge. Story 89. I somersaulted off a small rock overhang into the snow. A large, pointy rock hidden under the snow smashed into my knee. I had a 2-inch gaping wound above my kneecap that I never got stitched. Story 90. I had surgery to repair a hernia. Ladies, the line forms to the left. Story 91. I fell face first on the stairs and opened a wound in my eyebrow when I was about 4 years old. Story 92. When I was 2, my grandfather gave me a Snickers candy bar. I was so excited that I sprinted out the back door and ran into the corner of an open pickup truck tailgate. It left a boomerang-shaped scar on my left cheek, and with each heartbeat blood spurted from the wound. It looks pretty cool now, all these years later. Story 93. Bike crash at age 14. Elbow hit the gravel first at 30 kilometers per hour. It has been long enough that it is gone now. Story 94. I have a scar above my right eyebrow. I was told it happened when I was about 2 years old. I was carrying a glass. I fell, the glass shattered, and it cut the skin near my eye. Story 95. I was playing at a friend's house, sliding on my knees across the tile. There was no transition strip where the tile met the carpet. I now have scars on my knees from the scrapes. Story 96. I fell out of a tree at around 6. I cut the inside of my right shin when I fell. I am very old now and still have the scar. Story 97. I stumbled forehead first into a chair at my aunt's house when I was a toddler. Story 98. I was about 2 years old and pulled an axe off the wall. I had 2 stitches at the corner of my eye. Story 99. I was born by cesarean section, and the doctor's aim was off. A nick on my right side is now 4 to 5 inches long. Story 100. I have a scar shaped like a circle next to my right eye. A giant fight broke out in the housing project where I grew up. I went outside to watch the melee, and as I looked over, a random man hit me in the head with a bat. I blacked out. I suffered a concussion, a fractured orbital bone, and a large cut on my eyelid. I was 8 years old. Too long, did not read, do not grow up in the neighborhood in the 1980s. Story 101. I was jumping on the bed and hit my forehead on the wooden headboard. Apparently, there was blood everywhere, but I only remember the feeling of having the stitches removed. Story 102. I was riding on the handlebars of my brother's bike when I fell off and split my upper lip all the way through. Story 103. I scratched myself with the barrel of a ball-bearing gun and pulled the trigger. It bounced right off the bone in my foot. I still have a scar 30 years later, and I am much safer with guns. Story 104. I pulled down my mother's hot curling iron and it fell on top of my head. I also fell and hit my head on a tree stump during a kindergarten field trip. Story 105. The first one I remember is when I fell mouth first off a scooter onto concrete. Story 106. When I was 7 or 8, the cap popped off a metal broom that was propped up in the garage. My mom's car ran over the end of the broom, creating a sharp edge. Later, when I went to tie my shoe, I realized blood was pouring down my leg. As I walked by, the broom had cut my leg just above the knee. Story 107. Mom accidentally slammed my finger in the dishwasher drawer when I was a baby. She still feels bad about it, but I figured I was partly to blame for sticking my fingers in places they did not belong. Story 108. I severely injured the inside of my knee when I fell backward over some concrete blocks protruding from a seawall. Story 109. I was 4. My dad was helping me build a balsa wood glider. I kept pestering him to let me cut the pieces with the razor blade. He finally agreed and warned me not to come crying if I cut myself. I can't recall if I cried, but 61 years later I still wear that scar on the side of my index finger with pride. Now, with my dad's recent passing, that scar is a fond memory every time I look at it. Story 110. I was bitten by a dog on my left hand. I now have scars on the knuckles. Story 111. Someone paid me $500 to cut the top of my arm down to the bone with a handsaw. I was an 18-year-old alcoholic. Story 112. I grew up in the 1990s and mostly played outside. My friends and I climbed trees and anything else we could, laughing out loud. One day I wore a pair of worn-out sneakers that were very slippery, so I slipped from a tree. On the way down, a branch tore my arm. Happy memories and scars. Story 113. I fell off a porch onto the pavement when I was 5 or 6. My head broke the fall. Story 114. When I was 5, I fell into a fire pit that still had red-hot coals from a fire my dad had just put out. I was playing house with a friend. We were walking on the bricks around the fireplace when I stepped on a loose one and fell into the pit. I suffered several large second-degree burns and one small third-degree burn. Story 115. My mom was ironing clothes on her bed when 3-year-old me jumped onto it. I still have a burn scar 16 years later along my right arm. Story 116. I was a child looking at my older brother when he thought it would be funny to slam the window closed on me. The window shattered against my face, and somehow I only ended up with a tiny scar on my eyebrow. I barely remember anything else except my brother screaming not to tell my dad what happened, and me thinking that would be hard without a window. Story 117. I stepped through a barbed wire fence. Halfway through, my shin caught on a barb. At first, not feeling any immediate pain, I thought my pants had caught. Then I remembered I was wearing shorts. Story 118. I ran with scissors, tripped over a stick, and cut the area between my nose and upper lip. I was 5 and it healed well, so the scar is very small now. Story 119. When I was about 12, we were hanging out on top of my friend's shed, a playhouse in the backyard. We all jumped off, but I caught the top of a chain-link fence next to it and ended up hanging by my right leg. I pulled myself off, ran home, and my dad took me to the emergency room. I had 7 stitches, which are almost invisible now. Story 120. My brother slammed the refrigerator door, and a decorative plate struck me on the hairline with its edge. The plate did not break, but the impact fractured my skull. Story 121. I was hit by a car when I was 5 while crossing the street to the house across from ours. The car had been stopped with the driver looking at a garage sale. I assume she accelerated without looking. Story 122. I don't know if it was my first, but it was certainly an early one. I have a scar about a centimeter long running from the corner of my right eye toward my temple. I was told I received it at nursery when I was just over 1 year old, when another child hit me with a toy car. Story 123. I was jumping on a trampoline and hit my head on the metal frame. Story 124. I was walking the dog when he started to run, so I ran too. I am bad at judging the correct distance between myself and other objects, and I ended up hitting my fist against the wall. I have 2 scars on my knuckles from that, and I like to tell people they are from a fight. Story 125. When I was 4, I fell off the bed, put my arms out, and my arm simply bent in a way an arm does not normally bend. Story 126. When I was 3 years old, I fell off my bed while jumping and cut my forehead, which required 14 stitches. I am 40 and can still see some of the scars. Story 127. When I was a toddler, a thermos of hot coffee spilled on my lower leg and foot. Decades later, some of the scarring from the burn is still present. Story 128. A cat scratched my face while I slept in my crib. The second scar resulted from a glass tabletop falling on my genitalia. The overcooked hot dog analogy is apt, but time heals all wounds, and penile scars are rare and impressive. Needless to say, the hospital staff had separate conversations with me, my parents, and my brothers about life at home. Story 129. I cracked my kneecap in an amateur extreme sports accident when I was 6 years old. Story 130. I really liked skipping as a young child, even on a bed of jagged rocks of various sizes. I have had scars above my eyebrows since early childhood. The first time it was from tripping on rocks, and the second time on the same spot on my forehead. I was dragged around a pasture by my horse. Good times. Story 131. I ran through a sliding glass door and required approximately 50 to 60 stitches. I have 2 scars on my face and 1 scar on my knee. Story 132. The first scar I remember was from a dog attack when I was 3 or 4 years old. Story 133. I was 3 years old. I had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and they placed a portacath, so I have a 2-inch scar under my left collarbone. Story 134. I went down the hill next to my house at full speed on my Razor scooter. I still have the battle scar to this day. Story 135. I was on an overnight school ski trip. On the first night, I fell out of the top bunk onto a coffee table. Story 136. The first scars I remember are on my left knuckle and right elbow. I was pushing my bike down a very steep hill, and for some reason could not stop or slow down. Instead of braking or risking my bike rolling into my dad, I went straight into the pavement. I was not a very smart 8-year-old. Story 137. First scar came from a family member's dog, a boxer. I was in 2nd grade tossing the ball for him. One time I took too long and he tried to take it from my hand. It left me with a 1/2-inch wide, slightly deep scar on my wrist. In middle school, I fell backward against an open metal gym locker door, leaving a 3-inch scar on my lower back. Later, I crushed my pinky between a metal door handle, like a jail-style handle, and a concrete wall. It required 2 stitches. Story 138. When I was an infant, my mother was breastfeeding me. While readjusting me, one of her fingernails scraped my skin and removed a layer. She cried. I apparently did not, but I have had a scar ever since. Story 139. I fell face first into my grandparents' stone fireplace. I was just starting to toddle around. I had stitches in 2 places on my face. They are still visible when my face gets red. Story 140. My first scar occurred when I was a kid. People always advise against running around the pool. I slipped and split my chin open. My biggest scar, besides the one from surgery, was given to me by a ruler. Story 141. I took a header off the school slide. I landed face first and received stitches over my eye. It was the day before my birthday. I received nice gifts, though. Story 142. A child bit me and drew blood. I don't recall whether she was injured, but I remember being suspended for throwing her down the stairs from the top after she bit me. Story 143. I got it while playing football. The scar has kind of faded, but no hair grows on that strip of my shin. Story 144. Most recent? I would say it since I don't remember the first one. A glass exploded in my hand. Story 145. My father threw a toy at me when I was 3. I have a scar on the brow ridge above my right eyebrow. Story 146. In 7th grade shop class, I was using a stationary bandsaw to cut out my wood project. I stepped away, and my teacher told me I was bleeding. I looked down. The blade had sliced my finger just above my nail, but I did not feel it. Story 147. I had 3 sets of stitches by 18 months. The first set and scar came from a child throwing a block at me while I was at daycare. It is still visible but mostly hidden by my eyebrow. Story 148. In 1st grade, I was being an annoying little shit. I ran around the room, tripped, and cut my cheek on the corner of a desk. Story 149. When I was 6 months old, the cat knocked the vacuum cleaner onto my head. I developed a bald spot on my eyebrow. Story 150. When I was 2, I fell and hit my head on my grandma's magazine rack. I have had a small scar in the middle of my forehead ever since. Story 151. I rode my bike around my elementary school while there was construction. I slipped on some sand and fell, injuring my leg. Story 152. I had my spleen removed in 1974. The scar was about 2 inches long when I was 7, but now it is 6 inches as my abdomen has grown. Story 153, Whiplash. It came from the stick I used to scare the kids who insulted my friend so badly that he was incoherent for a whole day. Story 154. I got back from 2 weeks of holiday camping when I was about 9 years old. A few hours later, I went for a bike ride with the 3 girls next door. I got my foot caught in the chain, went over the handlebars, and despite wearing a helmet, I split my chin down to the bone and chipped all of my teeth. Story 155. My mother had long nails and tickled me too much when I was a baby. Story 156. I built my own stilts about 16 inches tall. They failed. I was 12 years old. Story 157. I was at Universal Studios Hollywood when the Van Helsing maze first opened. I was with my brothers and my dad, who walked through it quickly and left me in Frankenstein's lab. In the darkness, an actor of short stature jumped out and scared me. I ran, hit my hand on a metal prop, and suffered a deep cut. Park medics came to treat me, and I received a free visit to the park. The scar is hard to see now, but I like the memory. Story 158. When I was 2, I ran through the house to tell my dad goodnight. I ran into the corner of the fish tank, cut my eyelid, and had to get stitches. Story 159. When I was 5 years old, I was brushing my teeth on a stool in the bathroom. I slipped and fell face first into a vase. The bottom row of my teeth went through my bottom lip. Story 160. I was working at McDonald's. We had a bus, so I was in a hurry and hit my forearm with a hot McChicken basket. Story 161. What I tell people for street credibility is that I was in a knife fight. What really happened was open heart surgery. Story 162. I tripped and cut my chin on the corner of our coffee table when I was learning to walk. I have a small scar under my chin from that. Story 163. At age 4, I had a tracheostomy. I had croup and my throat swelled so much that it closed. I briefly died, and they performed the tracheostomy to resuscitate me. Story 164. The World Wrestling Federation was popular, and my brother decided to try out his body slams. He practiced on the bed but did not notice the corner of a nearby bedside table. Story 165. I was tossed out of a second-story window by my supposed father. Story 166. I had a hole in my heart. Open heart surgery tends to leave a few marks. Story 167. When I was in 2nd grade, I fell off a neighbor's roof and my tooth went through my lip. That's the shit we used to do for fun in the 1980s. Story 168. I had surgery a few hours after birth. I have a scar down the center of my stomach and one horizontally across my back, as well as a puckered scar from what I assume was a feeding tube. Story 169. They put a bolt in the back of my head to do something. Cannot remember. Story 170. I was cut by a skate on my chin when I was 13 years old. I had 5 stitches, but the amount of blood made me think it had hit my jugular. Laughing out loud. Story 171. I have no idea about the first, but one I remember is when I was a kid and had just gotten a copy of Kingdom Hearts 2. My chair was one of those plastic chairs, but the arm was broken. My arm resting on it kept getting scratched, but I was so enthralled by the game that I didn't care, and the next morning I looked like I had been mauled. Story 172. I do not know. On my last run, I ran into a mirror. It did not break because I caught the corner, which tore off a chunk of skin. It left a big scar. Story 173. Technically, it was surgery when I was a baby, but in my early teens I got a scar in a cooking class at school. Fast forward 20 years, and that scar is gone as far as I can tell. Story 174. I stabbed myself with a pair of scissors when I was 5 years old. Story 175. I face-planted on the trampoline's side rail after choosing a very poor flight trajectory. I split my chin down to the bone and needed 10 stitches to close the wound. My beard does a decent job of hiding the evidence these days. Story 176. Laughing out loud. My first was on my chest, and I have no idea how I got it. Story 177. I was opening the screen door as I walked into my house. I tripped, and the corner of the door struck the inside of my foot. I have a 3-inch scar. Story 178. A dog bit me. It was my fault, and I do not blame the dog at all. I was 10 years old at my cousin's friend's house. We were all outside, but I had to use the bathroom, so I went into the house alone and walked right up to the dog because I wanted to pet it. I was a stranger to the dog, so I cannot blame him for reacting. I never told anyone because I did not want the dog to get in trouble. Now I have bite scars on my hand. Story 179. I had surgery on my spinal cord shortly after I was born. Story 180. I put a hot glue gun to my arm because I wondered what would happen. I laughed and got a small circular scar on my right arm. I did it while in a gifted program class in elementary school, which I find ironic. If you are currently thinking about harming yourself, please seek immediate help. Call your local emergency number or, in the US, dial or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are outside the US, please contact your local emergency services or a local crisis hotline. Story 181. I was chasing Beth coughing, playing a game of kiss tag. I really wanted that kiss, but I guess she did not. I slipped on the gravel. It was the 80s. Story 182. I ran through a glass storm door when I was 6. I got 36 stitches across my right buttock. Story 183. Do people actually know how they got their first one? I cannot tell you how I got half of them, let alone how I got one when I was 5. Story 184. Jumping face first from the couch into a glass coffee table. My mother liked to have pretty things but also wanted a kid. Story 185. My siblings weren't watching me like they were told. I was 3 and wanted a nap. I tried to climb onto a big iron bed, and the spot where the headboard met the side rail gashed my face. It was not major, thankfully. I don't remember life without the scar. My first clear memory was the doctor coming toward me with scissors to remove the stitches. Story 186. I was 5 years old and pretending to be a dolphin after seeing Flipper. I wanted to do a backflip out of the water, so I stood on the top step and tried one. I hit my face on the edge of the bottom step, just under my nose. The force split my upper lip through to my gums for about 2 inches, and my upper lip hung down. It went numb immediately, and I only noticed when I saw blood in the water. I had many stitches on both the outside and inside of my lip. I was with my babysitter, who was reading a magazine, and I may have traumatized her when I asked if I was bleeding. No one else was at the pool. I am 34 now, and the scar is still very noticeable. Story 187. I decided it would be a good idea to surf down our hilly blacktop road on the back of a radio flyer tricycle. My dad was supposed to be watching me at the time. Story 188. When I was 6, boiling water burned my chest. I still have the scar 32 years later. My skin was peeled off. Story 189. In kindergarten I skidded on some rocks and a piece became embedded in my knee for years. I do not remember how it came out. I still have a purple scar on my knee. It has never changed color. I am 35. Story 190. I stuck my pinky finger on one of those older 1990s fans with grills when I was 2. It is still visible and palpable. Story 191. My first elementary school had an all-blacktop playground. There were many scraped knees and elbows. Story 192. Does anyone want to know what a go-kart muffler looks like? Take a look at my leg. A perfectly shaped section of my thigh will show you. Story 193. My aunt and I were at the kitchen counter watching television while she ironed her clothes. I had my arms folded on the counter, and she absent-mindedly set the edge of the iron down on my forearm. I had a neat half-moon-shaped burn scar on my arm until about high school when it flaked away one day. Story 194. I fell through a railing on a restaurant's outdoor patio. A board with a nail pierced my leg as I fell to the ground. It left a 6-inch scar on my thigh about 1 inch wide. Story 195. I was born with a birth defect and developed my first facial scars when I was 3 months old. I do not find my scars cool, and neither did the other children at school. Story 196. I had chickenpox and picked at one sore, and I still have the scar 39 years later. Story 197. I wrecked my tricycle into a retaining wall that appeared out of nowhere. Story 198. I fell face first onto a gravel driveway when I was a toddler. The The scar is very small and is now hidden by my hairline. Story 199. When I was 5 or 6, my hand was slammed in a car door, and I almost lost my pinky finger. Many decades later, the scar is barely visible, though it was quite prominent when I was young. Story 200. I was a dumb little idiot who ran headlong into a barbed wire fence. Things have not improved much. Story 201. I do not know if it technically counts, but on the day I was born, the doctor delivered me with obstetric forceps, and during the process he grabbed across my right eye, which is still slightly droopy more than 30 years later. I have no vision loss other than the usual amount from genetic nearsightedness. Almost everyone in my family needs glasses. My lenses are not thick, and ironically my other eye has the stronger prescription, even though it was not the one injured by the forceps. Story 202. As a toddler, I put my hand in the oven while it was on. I was about 2 years old. Story 203. I fell out of a sandbox because of an unaware parent. Meh, probably not the worst. But my second scar, ouch, that is a doozy of a story. I was in kindergarten, and schools in the 1990s did not place mats against the walls until the mid to late 1990s. A boy who would later murder his mother, as I was told, pushed me and my unsuspecting head into a concrete wall. My skull was cracked open, and I woke up in the hospital after a short medically induced nap. Story 204. I was bitten by a dog when I was 2. Whenever someone asks, I tell them I was bitten by a shark. Story 205. I burned my right thumb on my mom's curling iron when it was still hot. I was 3 years old and naive. My thumb has not looked the same since. I have no memory of the event past the point of contact. Story 206. I roll a lot in my sleep. I hit my head on the nightstand and now have 1/4 of a Harry Potter scar. The second one was because our cat was a jerk. Story 207. I was a small child who did not realize I was bothering the dog until it was too late. Story 208. I tripped over my kayak and landed on an oyster. Took me 11 years to get my first scar, and it will not be the last. Story 209. I had surgery as an infant. I have a scar on my abdomen from a colostomy bag and a scar on my ankle from an intravenous line that had a complication. I am alive and healthy 40 years later, so it was worth it. Story 210. I slid into bases for more than 10 years. The softball fields where we held tournaments had gravel mixed into the infield dirt. Story 211. I have scars on my right hand and left foot because I was born with an extra finger and an extra toe. The extra finger looked like an extra little finger on my right hand. The extra toe was attached to the inner side of my left little toe. The extra finger was removed soon after I was born because it was not fully developed. The extra toe required surgery because it had bone and was attached to my real toe. My parents could have left it, but they were concerned, perhaps on doctor's advice, that it might affect how I walk and make finding shoes difficult as I grew older. I had the surgery when I was 3 years old, and it is one of my earliest memories. I remember being in a hospital bed, sitting in a wheelchair with my foot in a cast, and how I felt at the time. The scars are not noticeable unless someone focuses on them, so they usually are not mentioned until I bring them up. Once mentioned, they are rather noticeable. I cannot move my left little toe much unless I move the rest of my foot, and I can feel cartilage on my right hand where the finger was. None of the scars hurt. I was likely born with this because of my father's side of the family, although my mother wonders if I was almost a twin because twins occur on her side of the family. Story 212. I have many scars on my legs from when I was a mosquito magnet as a child. I had, and still have, severe anxiety, so I repeatedly picked at insect bites and scabs, which became scars. A child at the beach once asked what was wrong with my legs because they looked like chicken pox. I also have fairly new scars on my hip, both knees under my armpit, and both ankles from being dragged down a sidewalk by a dog I was pet sitting. That was unpleasant. Story 213. I was bitten in the face by my friend's nephew's abused dog, a pit bull and Rottweiler mix. Months later, the dog attacked its owner at the courthouse and was euthanized after evaluation. Story 214. I have 2 scars. The first is from an infected cyst in my neck that required surgery after drainage. Recovery was very difficult and took 5 months to fully heal. The second is from a cyst in my armpit. It did not look like a cyst, but when the surgeon opened it, the inside was a mess. Fully healed after 4 months. I hope I never have another cyst, and I developed a trauma related to wounds because of these experiences. The first healed by secondary intention, which means there were no stitches. The second healed by primary intention, which means it was closed with sutures. Story 215. I was bitten by a menacing Pomeranian. Those evil little bitches. Story 216. I was in 3rd grade doing flips on the playground bars. I must have let go. I landed flat on my stomach and hit my chin on the small pebbles and rocks on the ground. I had to get 6 stitches, and one of my classmates said they saw bone. Maybe he was wrong. I never actually looked at it, to be honest. Story 217. The first scar came from a broken ceramic toilet. The second scar came when my hand got stuck under my friend as we slid down a 4-meter, 16-foot slide, peeling half the skin off the back of my hand. Story 218. I have a chickenpox scar on my face. Several other scars appeared over the following years. Story 219. I thought I was cool at 14 and rode a skateboard down a giant winding residential hill with very little skateboarding experience while trying to impress a boy. I still have gravel indent scars on my arm. Laughing out loud. Story 220. I bit through my lip when I tripped over a chair as a toddler. Story 221. When I was 4, my brother shot me in my palm with an arrow on the front lawn. My mother broke each of his arrows across her knee. Story 222. I was jumped by 3 men and had to fight them off with my bare hands. I beat them, but not before one slashed me with his hunting knife. No, I'm kidding. I grabbed a cracked jar and it broke in my hand. Story 223. 2nd grade brawl. A kid hit me with a chair and I received 4 stitches. Gent for the win. Story 224. I went flying over the handlebars of my bicycle when I was about 8. My elbow scraped along the gravel and the skin was torn away. I still have the scar 36 years later. Story 225. It was either falling face first off a playset, when my lower teeth pierced my lower lip, or being pecked by a peacock at the zoo. I believe the incident in which my lower teeth pierced my lower lip happened first and is likely my earliest memory. Story 226. I rode my bike downhill into the back of a garage and split my lip open. Not my first but my most memorable was when a man who was drunk and high on cocaine punched a glass lampshade I was sitting under, and it cut my cheek. Story 227. I have a burn scar about the size of a quarter on the back of my left hand. When I was a baby, my mother was taking a pot roast out of the oven and I tried to crawl in. I am a fire sign. I think it is cool and makes me unique. Story 228. My sister cracked me just above my eye with a rolling pin. I was striking her with the business side of a wire brush at the time in self-defense. It was the first time our parents had left her in charge, and the power went to her head. We all bled a lot that night. One eyebrow still splits where the hairs grow in the opposite direction. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.